parents are like, they should grow out of this by now. What is this all about? There is so much information out there. And then we're looking up all these diagnoses. Do I need to do this? What do I have to do? It's really, really tough because you think by now tantrums should be done. And my child is tantruming and they're 10 and they're defiant and they're getting calls from school, or they're so anxious that we can't even get them to school, or trying new things. But I have another child that this is not an issue. So how is it I've
Right.
got two kids in the same home parenting the same way? One is resilient, one is not. What is going on? And then parents feel really defeated and confused, and that's frustrating.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle McVittie. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life and marriage? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. This week we have guest another Michelle McVittie, and I'm really excited about this because this is very near and dear to my heart, this topic that we're covering today, because I happen to live and breathe this every single day. So I thought I can't be the only one who is navigating these challenges of parenting neurodiverse kids, because while every child has their own challenges, I feel like there are different degrees of challenges that parents can experience. And especially if you haven't had siblings or grown up with anyone who was neurodiverse, it could be really challenging trying to figure it all out without losing your mind and feeling crazy. So here we have Michelle McVittie. She has had a lifelong career working with children and families. Michelle is a parenting expert for CHCH Morning Live. She has worked in pediatric medical and mental health for over 20 years and has a BA in sociology and postgraduate diploma in child life studies, both from McMaster University. So, AKA, she is a child expert. Michelle sees Parents 101, has on-demand parenting programs, and does training for caregivers and professionals. Michelle's experience also comes from being a mom to 2 teenagers. I now have 1, so that in itself is a huge feat. She has been married to her husband for 20 years. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle. I'm so excited to dive into this with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And let's get started. What are the questions?
Yeah. So, can you share with us where you live, how old your kids are, and what you do?
Yes, yeah. So I'm from Canada. I'm in Ontario. I'm an hour away from Toronto. I am a child life specialist, like I said, but my main thing that I do is parent coaching. So I work with children, with parents that have children, usually about 6 and up to teenagers. We have seen a lot of good research out there that parent education and parent support is pivotal, that a child or teenager may need treatment, but not all children want treatment or are compliant. So really, we have to learn how to respond. And that makes a big difference. And in my career, I worked with young offenders, I've worked with teenagers, I've worked with children with mental illness and parents. I've lived all of it, right? So I've lived in the trenches with parents. I have 2 anxious children as well. And I've been in my marriage for 20 years. And depending on what you're going through, what your children are going through, what kind of lifestyle you had and parenting you had, it all comes together and sometimes in a mess. So that's where I help pull things apart for parents in bite-sized pieces in one-on-one coaching or with on-demand programs where I get right to the point with practical tips.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
So, What has led you down this path? How did you
Mhm.
know that this is what you wanted to do?
I didn't. It was another entrepreneurial friend. Yes, yes. I got into mental health, working pediatric inpatient, and I did that. I moved over to child and youth mental health. And it's one of those things where you're kind of like, I see people in the system, but there's a big gap and there's a lot of wait lists, and access to these things are really difficult. And not everybody needs to see a psychiatrist or psychologist. Not everybody has a diagnosis. So what do you do in the meantime? And I also noticed that I was transitioning. I was not an organized person. My husband and I had our first child. We're trying to figure out things. And I just kind of lost myself a little bit. And through my work, I realized I have to practice what I preach. I know evidence based and evidence informed strategies. I can see what is really working and seeing the proof every day. And why not give that to families, whether it's one of my reels, my Facebook group, one on one coaching, or one of my on demand programs? I want to give access to information. I actually started this with downloadables, charts that I created for parents that were simplified to help. And then I wrote a book called I Quit. Oh, wait, I'm the mom. And that's where we want to quit, but we can't, right? And instead of quitting, let's figure this out. And that's what that book was about. And it just led me into a journey of empowering other parents. And my clients, even my Facebook group people, are really good parents. Sometimes they just need some reassurance. And if we don't get that reassurance and we keep switching things up and we're on wait lists and we're hearing from people opinion based things, or this worked for me, or try this or do this, and we get really, really confused and we get stuck in the mud. And I want to be that person that says, hey, let's focus. Let's do these small little things. And sometimes you do need to see a psychiatrist. Sometimes you do need to see a therapist, but sometimes you just need some education and some validation that you are on the right path, or let's tweak this a little bit. Right. So that's my long story of how I got here.
I love that so much. And it's so true. I experienced the same thing when it came to my 7-year-old when he was a baby. I desperately needed help with sleep for him.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was trying all of the things. I was like, okay,
Mhm.
do gentle,
Yeah.
gosh, it's been so long. I don't remember the names anymore, like the
Yeah.
Ferber method and all the things. And I was like, I
Yes.
don't know, nothing's working. But then someone was like, okay, let's try this
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
2 weeks
Yeah.
then tweak it. I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yes.
And I see that so much in my clients as well, right? Because when you're in the trenches, you're just trying to try everything possible to make something work, to see some sign of progress, but it's hard to see progress when you're switching all of the time, right? You don't know what works, you don't know what doesn't work, and it's hard to reflect that way.
No, and a lot of my clients will say, I did this. Okay, that was great what you did. It's actually, I would give you that advice and you didn't get their result. So I can see why that's frustrating. So is it that we just have to keep going? The child or the teenager are still pushing boundaries and they're like, wait a minute, let's see if I can get away with this. Or is this strategy not fit their personality, that we do need
Right.
to tweak it a little bit? And sometimes that's tough because I don't know what I should be doing. And they're having a meltdown right now. Do I push them? Do I not push them? Do I let them stay home? And then my partner steps in and they punish them. And then I feel like I have to be super, super nice to the child to compensate for the punishment because I don't agree with it. Then we're arguing and I'm exhausted and I'm burnt out. And then
Yes.
I do nothing, you know? Yeah.
Yep. All the questions in your mind with so many different options. You're like, which path is the best?
It's true. It's true. And it's interesting that you talk about sleep because there is so much information if you've got children under 4, maybe 5.
Yeah.
After that, parents are like, they should grow out of this by now. Where am I going? What is this all about? There is so much information out there. And then we're looking up all these diagnoses. Do I need to do this? What do I have to do? It's really, really tough because you think by now tantrums should be done. And my child is tantruming and they're 10. and they're defiant and they're getting calls from school, or they're so anxious that we can't even get them to school, or trying new things. But I have another child that this is not an issue. So how is it I've
Right.
got two kids in the same home parenting the same way? One is resilient, one is not. What is going on? And then parents feel really defeated and confused, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, or even just noticing other families like, well, how come my child seems like they can't just follow along and follow the rules or be empathetic like other people or
Mhm.
just whatever, all the different things. It can get really challenging for you as a parent to wonder, did I do something wrong?
Yeah,
Why is it like this? Why is parenting so hard?
yeah.
And it can just send you down the rabbit hole with Google and, it's
I know. Yes. It's tough. It's
it's
tough. And you
crazy.
can feel defeated and not
Mhm.
motivated, right? So, and then we are switching things up, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk more about that. Okay. So, like, for those of you who are new to this show, I
Mhm.
myself have a teenager who is ADHD. He also has dyslexia, dysgraphia.
Okay.
My middle child, who is in first grade now, has sensory processing disorder. And of course, anxiety comes along with it.
Mhm.
So, and then I have an emotional toddler, which she's actually fairly, neurotypical. She's just a toddler. They're just all challenging, right? And I have had my hand in a lot of figuring things out and trying to navigate this world of like, okay, I cannot use the same strategies that I would use with any other child. I have to be very personalized in how I navigate. And to a certain extent, like everybody deserves to have like individual treatment, right? Because we're all different.
Yeah.
And having a neurodiverse child seems like you got to do that a little more, right? It's almost like walking on eggshells sometimes.
Yes.
So, how do you handle challenges and how do you support your clients with handling challenges that come with parenting neurodiverse kids who are strong willed, have ADHD, have anxiety, have, the infinite list of things that fall under someone who's not neurotypical?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I do is validate. Everybody wants to feel heard. Your child, your
Hmm.
teenager, but especially that parent that is usually on Facebook looking for an answer. And I am that person that will say, hey, this is really tough. You're doing really good things, but I can see how you're frustrated. And it's that knowing that you're not alone, right? So that's that piece of it, being in a community, having friends, having people like myself that understand where you're coming from. Then it's putting yourself in the child's shoes. So when we talk about strong-willed nature, when we talk about an ADHD child or a child with anxiety, which those are my three specialties, and teenagers, it's understanding, putting yourself in their shoes and finding that kernel of truth in their struggle. And the brain is under construction until 25. For a neurodiverse brain, it's 30. So parents hear that and they're like, oh, I'm like, so there's lots of time to build those positive connections, but also lots of time until their brain develops, right? So right now we may not be seeing things. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but we're seeing it now. We're doing the work and we're not seeing the progress. So giving them a little bit of that reassurance, it doesn't necessarily feel encouraging in the moment, but at least you understand it. Also, talking to parents that have a child with ADHD, that their executive functions, such as emotional control, task initiation, organization, time management, focus, working memory, I can go on, is up to 3 years
Yep.
behind. So you're thinking this 7-year-old has to figure this out. Well, they're responding more like a 4-year-old. And up until 5, having temper tantrums is normal. And your child is really smart, maybe can talk about astronomy and dinosaurs and all these things, but getting out of the door is impossible. And meltdowns happen on a regular basis over things that we think are trivial. And it's the same thing with anxiety. Anxiety is fight, flight, or freeze response, and understanding that we have where is the proof, trying to find the fear thought behind it, what is really going on here, and not accommodating, because we tend to accommodate behavior and we tend to accommodate anxiety, and that turns into a pattern. And it can be really sticky because when you stop accommodating, which some parents just want to do cold turkey because they've had enough, whether it's a behavior and giving them the candy in the candy aisle, letting them sleep in your bed, or saying, fine, you don't have to go to school today because your stomach hurts and you're worried about your test. And we just want to cut it out because like, we've had enough. Have we been too nice? We shouldn't have done this. Now look at what I've done. I want to stop this cold turkey. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really giving yourself some grace, understanding you get triggered as well, and how you respond is really important because you can't affect your child, but also understanding where your child is coming from, finding the kernel of truth in their struggle and why they're struggling. What are those triggers? Or there's learning deficits or executive function struggles. It's a lot. It's very overwhelming. Very overwhelming.
It is, especially when you physically see someone in front of you that seems like they should be able to do something.
Yeah.
But over the years, I've finally realized the detriment to us
Mhm.
is assuming and setting expectations that are not fair or realistic to them as an individual. It's the should. Like, you should be able to do this by now. You should be able to handle this. This shouldn't be happening anymore. That only creates disappointment within us and sets them up for failure. And then if we don't have the tools to handle that, they get the brunt of it. And it's not fair.
It's not. And it's tough because I don't want a parent to feel judged. And I really want to make sure that that door is open, that they can ask questions, that they do feel like I am that safe space that they can ask.
Mm-hmm.
But those are kinds of things that we have to think about, right? Where you're triggered, you're saying they shouldn't, they should, this is enough. But have we taught this, right? I remember speaking to a father that had a fairly older teenage son, and I was feeling frustrated. And I'm like, well, if you send him on his way to live on his own, it's essentially like sending a 7-year-old through the door because he's not resilient. So I get the frustration, but these skills don't just develop because they turn a certain age. They don't just learn how to budget. They don't learn how to use a certain amount of money to buy food when Uber Eats is so quick to grab. Or McDonald's or whatever. It's like, well, if I finish a project or I finish a degree or a program, then I have to go on to real life. And our children at different degrees, we have to look behind the iceberg. We see the tip of the iceberg. We see the behavior. We see them freaking out because you gave them the blue cup over the purple cup. It's not about the cup. But figuring all that out is very complicated, especially when people are chiming in with judgment, telling you that you need to punish
Mm-hmm.
more, you're not being
You're being too
consistent.
soft.
Being too soft is a
I
huge
hate that
one.
one.
Yes. And then do this and do that. So many different opinions. And then we feel frozen and defeated. Right.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so easy to just judge your own situation too. Even if your friends and your family aren't saying anything, but
Mm.
because you're comparing, it can be really easy to be like, I just want to hide because I'm so embarrassed that this is difficult for everyone and they're making a scene. But it's like, they're having a hard time too. And I think that's the biggest transformation for me was actually building that level of empathy and compassion for their experience. So, like,
Yes.
you sharing, like, put yourself in their shoes was such a big change for me. Like, is it easy to do that?
Oh,
Not always, not always, but it always makes things easier for me to dial it down a notch to be like, okay, I'm not being fair right now.
it's tough. It's tough. And that's where that self-care is so important, and making sure you've got an ally, so if you and your partner are struggling with seeing eye to eye, then you can feel alone, or you can feel like you do one thing and then they come in and they unravel what you've just done. You can feel defeated. It can feel really tough. And when you are barely keeping your head above water, you don't have the patience to deal with some of these things, or stay consistent, or problem solve with a child that is resisting problem solving with you. So it's like, we're just going to survive here. And do you want to continue surviving, or do you want to thrive? But it can take some work, right? A lot of work.
Yeah. So, what types of self care have you found that really kind of just like give the biggest bang for the buck for parents? Because as a parent who has two neurodiverse children, I understand it's very mentally, emotionally, and even physically taxing sometimes if we have an off day, or if they're both kind of like taking turns. And it's like, I just need to breathe, right? And then you've got the house to take care of. Maybe you work, you've got that going on. And you've got the pressure of, oh my gosh, I need to get you in bed, because if you don't get good sleep, the next day's just going to be set up for
Yeah.
failure. What have you seen and what have you experienced for yourself that's been the best type of, or even category of self care for parents to do for themselves, to really just remember to prioritize their well-being? Because I mean, just from personal experience, when I don't do that, I have so much less patience, I'm so much less compassionate, and I'm yelling a lot more for sure.
Yeah, this is a difficult question because everybody is so different, and everybody's distress tolerance is different. So
Mhm.
you may be able to handle more than I am, right? Your body may be responding differently. I think the number one thing is awareness, right? And if we think about the stress cycle, it's really understanding the stress cycle. And the stress cycle is the thoughts, it's the feelings, it's the body. I call it body talk for little kids, but that body talk, right? So the stomach aches, the hair's falling out, you're not sleeping, you're grinding your teeth. And then we have helpful versus unhelpful behaviors that go along with it. So you just are spinning and spinning. And then you really want to pull some of these things apart to say, when a thought comes up, I am the worst mother, right? What did I do? Am I being too soft? Where is the proof to say that? Can I take a pause? That always or nothing thinking, those thinking traps, that we're catastrophizing, worst case scenario, I'm always screwing up, I never do it right. Really? Like never? So those are thinking traps. And depending on our distress tolerance, this could also lead to a more significant stress, because if you have an anxiety disorder yourself, for example, that's never been diagnosed, these thoughts don't stop. But if
Mhm.
you're able to look at these thoughts, pause for a minute, do a little of that back and forth, boss it back, as I say with the little kids, like boss back your anxiety or your worry bully. Where's the proof and what can I say? What's a positive mantra? What is something that's going to work? And then my body and my feelings, how do I want to feel? What makes me feel happy? What makes me feel proud? What are those activities? And then what makes my body feel good? And how do I set myself up for that? And the behaviors. And is this helpful or unhelpful? Am I avoiding? That's unhelpful. Do I continue to do more and more and more and don't ask for help, or I have to do it a certain way, or I refuse to go to bed with a dirty kitchen? Those kinds of things where we're just perpetuating the stress, and we have to take a pause and we have to look at perspective. If those things are spinning and spinning and you do not know how to step off, that's burnout. And that's where a lot of us are living. But everybody's distress tolerance is different. There could be a mental illness, whether it's diagnosed or not, because there's a huge mental illness stigma. Because if you break your arm, you'll go to a doctor. If you have a headache, you'll take Tylenol. But ADHD medication, depression, no, 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 no. I want to do this on my own. There's a lot of stigma. So it's really being aware, knowing who your supports are, and looking through those things that I said, right? Like the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, and putting the pause on and what matches for you, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. That's exactly the method that I teach to improve communication. So
Yes. Damn
do
right.
this and it benefits literally every aspect of your
Yeah.
life, because bringing more awareness, more intention back into your life is only going to help you live more your way than to just let your thoughts run the show. Because while you may not be able to control your first thought, you can definitely choose what to do with it,
Yeah.
right? You can choose what path you take next. But if you let it spiral, then you're choosing to be the victim of your thoughts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you bring more awareness, you can start to bring more choice into your life. Okay, how am
Yes.
I going to respond to this? Am I
Yes.
going to do my usual? That's
Yeah.
not helpful. Or do I see another way out of this? Is there another option I can give to myself? And it does take a mental effort. But I must say that after practice and consistency, it does become more natural to hit the timeout button on your internal processes
Yeah.
and be like, okay, I'm doing it again. Like you're recognizing that you're going into that pattern that you've done for decades. I don't like this path.
Yeah.
What can I do? And that pivotal moment right there, when you decide to take a right instead of a left,
Yeah.
makes all the difference between how you end up responding to your child, how you end up arguing with your spouse or not arguing. So I really do recommend that you like rewind this if you need to listen back to Michelle describing the cycle so that you can start to implement this into your life, because it is life changing for you
It
to get
is.
back into the driver's seat instead of just being on autopilot, doing things that you've
Exactly.
always done because this is how you are, right? That's a trap. And I want to help you get out
Yeah.
of it.
Absolutely. I can tell this is a passion of yours and what you're good at, right? This is why you help your clients. I think another piece too is the way we've been socialized. We are starting to
Mhm.
make change. I have raised my children to be very different. I am a recovering pleaser. And when things have been the norm for so long and it's still out there, just smile all the time. The strongest women are the ones that are smiling through the pain. No, they're not. That's not okay. Like, don't normalize those things. Or it's always wine o'clock for a mom. Like, having a
Right.
glass of wine is fine, but why are we normalizing drinking ourselves numb to because we don't like motherhood? Like, this is a problem. And is it the motherhood you don't like, or you're just exhausted because you're doing all the things? So it's really important that we're normalizing this, that there are people like you and I and therapists and doctors and people that can say, hey, let's get you connected, let's get you supported, because this doing this on your own, it feels like you're treading water and you might be just dipping and dipping lower under the water. And that's not a good feeling at all.
Yeah, let's teach you how to float, which
Yeah.
is so relevant because my son just learned how to do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
look,
It
you
is.
can last. You don't have to struggle when you get
That's
tired anymore.
right. Exactly. So true. I love that analogy. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is one thing that I want to ask before we wrap this up.
Mhm.
So having neurodiverse kids can be very challenging to you and to your marriage. It's kind of like another thing that gets
Mhm.
added on, right? Like whether you're having financial issues or in laws, having neurodiverse children, you're dealing with them day in, day out. You're trying to figure out your way. Maybe you're forgetting to take care of yourself. And then you have your husband who may or may not be on the same page with parenting styles, or maybe they don't have the capacity to be as patient and compassionate as you because they haven't put in that time to learn more, right? Or they're just so conditioned to parent a certain way
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
what you're doing is completely opposite than what they're used to, what they experience, right? That is the struggle,
Mhm.
trying to break generational cycles of how we
Yes.
raise kids.
Yeah.
And it could really break a marriage apart if we don't address these issues. So, what have you seen in couples that you've helped and how to bring them back together to be a united front so that being parents isn't breaking the marriage, because we don't decide to become parents to be like, okay, I'm done with our marriage. Let's have
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Let's see if we could pass this test. Like, no, we do it because we want to add joy and fulfillment to our lives and add these positive experiences, right? And then you end up having kids where you didn't expect to have these additional challenges with raising them.
Yeah.
Then what?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I see, and I do love that I see more couples, parents coming together because, yeah, they've been brought up differently. Their values are different. You talk about like, compassion might not be there for one parent. So the other parent would have to step in. Maybe one parent is a little bit better at staying consistent and setting firm but kind boundaries. But I think it's that we don't talk about it, or when we talk about it, we don't agree with it, or this behavior, we need to deal it with this way. And one parent is saying, I don't agree with what you're doing. So that's why they come here. Come to me because we can kind of figure this out together. And, I had this conversation with a couple, and it's like, okay, so you're really good at setting boundaries and staying consistent, and you're really good at giving compassion. But we need to make this work together so it doesn't look like the child is playing you, because children will split when they can. So I know what I can get away with one parent. I know what I can get away with the other. Grandma comes over and we're having brownies for dinner, right? So they know, and they've got lots of time. And if you have a strong-willed child or a child that's emotionally dysregulated, we really need to be mindful of how we respond and what we're doing. And having somebody to work through that is important, because I'm there to say, look, I see where you're coming from. I see where you're coming from. And let's find that middle ground. So
Yes.
no one feels like you're undermining me, or I have to come in and rescue, or that whole wait till your father comes home from years ago. Sometimes we get into that pattern that one parent is disciplinarian and one parent is more soft. And it doesn't need to be that way. But if the behavior is running the household and one parent says, I know you want a cookie, we've decided on one, and that's it, and the child's having a meltdown, and you have the other parent that comes in and says, no cookie at all, take all the cookies away and you get nothing for a week, or here, just give them the cookie, I'm sick and tired of this. The child's like, yes, and the parents become distressed, right? So coming together, making a plan, working together with your strengths, knowing what your negotiables and non-negotiables are, so important. But a lot of times we don't talk about it. And then when there's a disagreement, the communication breaks down, right? So you just start
Yeah.
to forget it. You just end up doing your own thing.
Definitely. And I've seen from a lot of couples is they have not had that conversation to develop their new culture, because we
Yes.
each have a culture that we grew up with. And I'm not just saying like ethnic, right? I'm saying like how you talk about feelings, how you deal
Yes.
with disappointment, how you deal with unmet expectations, whatever, right? And when you have kids, they can be really triggering to you because of your childhood, and you and your spouse may have different triggers and different ways of handling things, whether you handle it or don't, whether you're extreme or not extreme. And so the biggest thing that I think Michelle and I agree on is you have to take some awareness of, okay, what is the culture that I grew up with when it
Yeah.
comes to raising kids and emotions and talking
Mhm.
things through, problem solving, whatever. And how can we come together almost like a Venn diagram, right? You've got your circle, he's got his circle. You got to draw a new circle. Where do you overlap and where do you want to
Yes.
go too? Because just
Yes.
because you didn't grow up with that culture doesn't mean you can't create a new one to incorporate things that you want, that you wish you had, right?
Yes, exactly. I love that. That's great. Yeah. And I think it's just that communication. And when there's a communication breakdown, that's where you can go and get some support. It doesn't mean you're going to be with that person for, all year. It just means that you're going to see that coach, or you're going to see that therapist, or you're going to see whoever that's going to help negotiate that for you. You're going to work together to make that plan. And then when there's a bump in the road, we can reevaluate, we can readdress, we can go back to that therapist, we can go back to the coach to say, this isn't quite working. And then you move forward. It's magical when it happens. And it's amazing when I see parents do that, because a lot of times, I see that with the system, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And by then, people are feeling exhausted. They're burnt out. Their face is down in the carpet. They've had enough. But if we could have done something ahead of time, if we could have put some of these things into place, diagnosis or no diagnosis, if something is struggling in your home, what are those little steps? What are those action steps? What are the skills that need to be there for parents and children? And how do we make it work together? Like, collaboration is really magical, where everybody feels heard and there's action steps and you're able to move forward.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. There's nothing wrong with asking for help, right? You are not meant to be an expert at everything. And just
No,
because you need help doesn't mean that you're bad at it.
no,
When you're in the situation, it's really easy to get tunnel vision and not notice certain things going on because you are in it. So as people outside helping you, it's much
yeah,
easier for us to identify patterns and notice, like, oh, have you tried this? It could be very simple things like, oh my God, I should have thought of that myself. You might have a lot of those moments. It doesn't have to be hard, but because you are so overwhelmed by your scenario, by your challenges, your peripheral vision is probably
yes,
impaired a little bit because you're so
absolutely.
emotional about it. And that's
Mhm.
all of us, right? Like, I have areas like that. I'm sure Michelle has that too.
Me
So
too.
there is nothing wrong with getting help. If anything, get it sooner so that you don't have to deal with it any longer, right? Like,
It's true. Absolutely. And there's many different venues, but yeah,
mhm.
I think that help and that shame and the embarrassment that we feel, there is no coach or clinician out there that wants to shame you, right? They
No.
are happy that you're coming to them. You may feel shame, but let's work through that so we can move on, because it's actually a barrier to changing things and changing the cycle. But this is a learned thing. Our culture has hidden emotion. It has hidden a lot of this, right? Where we just move forward. You don't dare air your dirty laundry. Right. That's how I was brought up. Right.
Yep, same.
And centuries before that. And that can be a cultural piece. It's society. And let's see what works for us and what doesn't. And if you're feeling stuck and spinning your wheels, finding that right support is important.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Well, I could talk about this with you forever. We might even have to just do a spin-off
yeah,
episode
I
if
love
you're
that. I would
interested.
love to come back. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what's the best way for people to connect with you? If they're like, I absolutely love her. She's definitely my vibe. I need her help like yesterday. Where
Yeah.
can they reach you?
The easiest way is at my website at momthemanager.ca. And I am on Instagram as Mom the Manager. I have a 15-minute call, so you can book a free call with me. And I also have two Facebook groups. So I have ADHD Parenting, and I also have Overworked to Overjoyed. So I have two separate parenting groups. The ADHD one is really big. It's a little bit bigger, and my other one is a little more intimate, but it really depends on what you need. But if you're specifically just looking for ADHD, you know where to go. And Overworked to Overjoyed, I talk about self-care, I talk about ADHD, strong-willed children, anxiety, and parenting teens. Yeah.
Amazing.
Mm,
So, before I let you go, I love to ask a fun question for the listeners
love
to get
that.
to know you a little bit more.
Mhm.
So, because we've been talking so much about self care, I thought it'd be
Yes.
great to ask you what your favorite form of self care was.
Quality time is my number one. And that means hanging out with my friends, hanging out with my family. And my husband will drop my son off for baseball for practice or something. And there's an amazing Thai restaurant around the corner from where he practices, and we'll grab some food. I like spending time with people. I don't like to be alone. I like my
Yeah,
alone time, but I like to hang out with people. Yeah.
you like to build
Right.
connection.
I do. Yes, I do.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your insight, all your tips, and I hope you listeners got a lot out of this episode. I certainly enjoy this conversation a lot. And if you want to work with her, please don't hesitate to say hello to her, reach out to her. She's very nice, very friendly, and so willing to help you. She's here for
Yeah.
you. All right. Well, I will catch you all back here next week. Thank you again, Michelle.
My pleasure.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perta Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.